Live from Los Angeles, it's the Life Changes Show with tonight's guest, performer, musician, and composer, Christopher Caliendo. And now, your host, the MC, the master of change, Fillipo Voltaggio.
Am I happy to be hosting this show with it's going to be grand. And actually, I'm not surprised that a word like that would pop out of my mouth when I'm talking about Christopher Caliendo. His music, people want more. They're not done when the concert's done. They hang around like, it's over already. They want to meet him because the music just brought them in and held them there, and they're not done. I went to his wedding. This guy writes the music for his wedding. You're from New York, right? Aren't you from New York?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I can say it. So he writes the music for his wedding. I mean, what kind of guy does that? And actually,
The guy in love.
The guy
in love.
There you go. He's written for the Pope of the Pope of the world, the Pope, and he's written for the movies, like the big movies, Sony Pictures. Amazing pictures he's written for TV. He's gotten awards. Los Angeles Times said the best bet is Christopher Caliendo. Hey, the way he speaks, it's gonna be grand. I promise you this. When we come back with our guest Christopher Caliendo right after this. We are back. In just a moment, you will hear the man of which I speak. Mark, you've never heard me talk about anybody like that before, have you?
No, and for our listeners, there isn't anyone in the studio that is sitting with their back to the entrance. And we had to back the microphones up so that Fillipo could talk with his hands more. This is going to be a great show.
I did use my hands. I don't always do that. I'm usually much more composed. But Christopher Caliendo is in the studio today. As a matter of fact, we're at Studio NoHo in North Hollywood. And when we told Brent Hahn, our engineer here at Studio NoHo, he said, "Oh, Christopher Caliendo, I know him." Well, of course, everybody in the industry knows Christopher Caliendo and his music. And it's exciting. It's exciting to have him here. And this is the good news, because we've talked about this before, Christopher and I, that he brings a certain kind of expectation to everything he does. And what I really love about the subject we're going to be talking today, which is composing the symphony of your life, is it's part of a curriculum that he has for musicians and for composers and for artists. And this is expanding the conversation. Corporations are hiring him to give this talk. Obviously, they're not musicians or artists, but it's something that everybody needs to hear. So I think for the first time on radio, we get to have Christopher Caliendo.
My mother's smiling, Fillipo.
Your mother's smiling.
Cristoforo, my mother's smiling.
I love that. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here, Fillipo.
So,
Mark, thank you.
You're a performer, you're a composer, you're a teacher, you're a publisher. You've written symphonies, oratorios, and like I said, for films and TV, and like I said, your wedding, and now your son's birth.
Imminent birth.
Let's just start there for a moment.
Okay. We'll start at birth.
What do you write? Yeah, let's start. What are you writing for your son's birth?
It's an oratorio staged for narrator, 3 vocalists you should be interested in.
Okay.
8 woodwinds, 4 woodwinds in pairs, 2 flutes, 2 oboes, 2 clarinets, 2 bassoons, harp, 2 percussionists, full choir, and strings. And my wife and I chose them very carefully. And 5 of them are fully orchestrated, 4 of them are fully orchestrated and ready to go. I have 3 more left, and I have 3 weeks left before he's born. So maybe 1 a week, and I'll finish it by the time he arrives.
Well, with everything else that you're doing, I wish you the best with that. This happened again, but you're of Italian descent, Mark's of Italian descent, of course I am, and John Barcellona, our flutist and musical guest, is as well, who will be playing your music. So before we get into all that, here you are, You're born in simple means, and it's not like your son who's having music written for the birth of a king. You didn't have that fanfare growing up. What was it like growing up, actually?
I grew up in Queens, my initial years, and my dad was was born in Brooklyn. Our house was a very happy house. It was very small, and 9 people lived in it for many years. My grandmother from Italy, my daughter Lucia, and it was a very warm, happy home. My mother used to tell us, "A tavola non si vecchio mai Cristoforo." At table, no one grows old. You know, in those Christian days, no birth control, and Catholics. My father came back from the Korean War, married Mom, and 5 kids later. He worked 3 jobs, so he was a very hardworking man, and he still is at 85 years old. He still walks 6 miles every morning. Very disciplined man. So I kind of grew up in a quasi-military household with a domestic Italian mother, cooking all 3 meals, cleaning the clothes, taking care and educating 5 children. But predominantly, that I think if the ingredients of my dad were communicated early on, they were discipline and an absolute love of music. My father wanted to be the musician. I'm the only son of 5 children, and as a result, my dad sort of flagshipped me and said, "Son, you are the spokesman for the family. I had to go to the war. My 2 brothers didn't, essentially. You have the means, you have the chance to go to school and make the last name famous." So pressure somewhat, but I was so in love with music. I didn't look at it as pressure, but just a way to augment my father's joys and fancies. I'm self-taught. Really, a lot of people don't recognize this, but on guitar and on piano.
I didn't know this.
Yeah, my father was my first teacher.
Really?
And the story goes that I was 4 and a half when he handed me a small guitar and taught me the basic 1, 4, 5 chords. I rebuked it. I did not want anything to do with the guitar. 6 months later, my father put the guitar back in my lap, so I'll try once more. My father was a guitarist. And I had memorized the 1, 4, 5 chord. And he thought that was highly unusual. But it was that second introduction, and I was off and running. I never put it down. I never turned back. It was music, and that was it.
Well, listening to your music as I was listening again to your rehearsal today, it's anything but 1, 4, 5. I mean, you took that and you did rebuke it.
Well, let's just say I added to it.
You added to it.
I added tango, gypsy, flamenco, farandola, yeah.
Right, and
Yeah.
so I'm glad you're going there because so your family's Italian, but your styles are all over the place and they're mixed in together.
Correct.
So what happened?
Well, growing up with Italian minstrel music, the tarantella, as we know, and learning guitar through my dad, there are 2 vocabularies in the household that navigated my response to music. Opera, of course, Italian opera, and jazz. My father loved American jazz. He wanted to emulate Harry James, what young man didn't, and he still would pick up the trumpet and play a high C and put it down and go, "My career's over." He was very funny that way. But those 2 ingredients kind of were ear training for me. But I loved the guitar. It's a folk music. It's a folk instrument. And I had started to learn the minstrel music of my heritage, the Italians, and the American folk music of jazz. So it was obvious that in my early scratchings of music and when I started to hear music and started to write it down, that these influences really started to shape my personality at an early age. So those are the first 2. And then there was a precocious or proclivity to learn tango. What does Argentine music sound like? And what is Cuban music? Where did the salsa come from? I was just fascinated, and I was often running on. And I thought it was also the proper discipline for composers in general to learn, mimic, imitate the various musics of the world. And looking back in hindsight, it has literally created almost every opportunity I've had, both in film, in the different aspects of music making, whether it's stage, theatrical, or film. I could isolate a break that resulted from following that focused dream, which was world music on the acoustic guitar, and legitimizing the steel string guitar in the classical musical world.
Right. Before you, had anybody done that? I mean, in classical music, a steel string guitar?
No one's asked me that question before, and I can't think of anyone that has. Now, of course, I had my guitar when Al Di Meola and Paco Lucia and Larry Coryell, when these people began to unplugged acoustic concerts. That's not what I'm talking about here.
Right.
I'm literally talking about, now thinking as a publisher, there's a niche there where the acoustic guitar hasn't had a voice. And what would it be like publishing music that sounds like inspired improvisation, world music, for classical musicians who are taught in very rigid, this is Mozart, this is Shostakovich, this is Brahms, Beethoven. And not that there's not flexibility in that, but let's just go with rigidity in that style. But the world musician, if you look at precocious children, gypsies, real gypsies, they're incredibly gifted very young, but it's a very improvisational speech, language.
Right.
And I was fascinated by this improvisational nature of music. And can you publish it? Can I write it? Can I publish it? So you reading the written note can sound like inspired improvisation and walk outside the periphery of classical rigidity. And that became my definitely life calling, no question.
So actually, you bring up a really good point before we go to break here. At ChristopherCaliendo.com, people can actually buy your music because there are schools all over the United States and the world, actually, that are buying your music and bringing it into the school for flute and for guitar. I mean, what other?
All instruments.
All instruments.
Concert band to string quartets to string orchestras to everything. Yeah.
So when I first met you, that's what you were doing. So now it's the whole gamut.
Correct.
Wow. Well, more power to you. Well, they're another fine example. You do it alla grande. You do it in a grand way. When we come back, this course that you teach to university schools, I love it. How do you say the student wakes up after graduation and says,
What's next?
What's next? Yeah.
Who am I?
Exactly. All right. So
big issue today.
Yeah. Well, that's not the only issue. That people are waking up all the time, going, "What's next?"
They're waking up sleepy.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Right. Okay. All right. So when we come back, this course that really can apply to so many people, and we too can learn how to write the symphonies of our life alla grande with Christopher Caliendo when we come back right after this. We are back. We are talking to Christopher Caliendo, who is a performer, a composer, a teacher, a publisher, and so much more, as I'm sure you've already come to know. If you want to know more about Christopher Caliendo, go to ChristopherCaliendo.com. I'll spell that out for you. ChristopherPher, and Caliendo is CALIENDO.com. I had a pause there because caliendo actually means hot, right?
It does mean hot, and also could be traced to the 13th century Gregorian calendar when the hierarchy and the priesthood would discuss the holy days of obligation, and it may come from the Latin calends.
Well, there it is.
There it is.
Christopher's course is very right on, I think, in what it aspires to do, and I loved where listen to this. This is in the course syllabus. He says, this course will not be taught as an onerous burden, but as a source of joy and personal power. Where do you come across as a teacher even thinking about teaching with joy and personal power? Who does that? Talk to me about that. Where does that come from?
Probably it comes from a very honest and transparent desire to be at this place in my life where its initial course took shape as a performer and then as a composer, and then into a need to publish my music with the advent of the computer, seeing an opportunity that worked sort of against the growing paradigm shifts where bankers, the agencies of music, the record companies of music, the publishers of music were only grooming the up-and-coming, not grooming the up-and-coming, the already known. And we went through this because of economic reasons, and even Pavarotti, when he was interviewed later in life, and they asked, are there any more Luciano Pavarottis in the world? And he said, no, frankly. He says, today the tenor gets paid $3,000 for his debut, and then the agent wants 15, and then 25, and it's about the money. And of course, Pavarotti studied voice till he died. My respect to myself, I was very fortunate to have my music popularized, but through publishing. And then, of course, focusing on world music in classical universities as my base to create clients. I was then hired to teach master classes. There was a need for pedagogy. Well, can you help us teach these children world music for flute choirs, for violin, piano, for clarinet and guitar, whatever arrangements I'd make? That said, I began to sit and listen to students prepare and perform my music. These are high school to college. And that's when it hit me that wow, they all sound the same. What's creating the automation process?
Ooh.
What is happening with our musical institutions consistently enough that any type of original performance, and now you know as a performer, when you actually meet a performer, a great meaning zoned, that instrument is a part of their body. You can't take the two away from each other. One is inseparable to the other. Is that an acquired skill? Can it be taught? These questions started to fuse in my mind, and I started thinking, can it be taught? How do we teach children today, early on, to access their original traits that ultimately can be surfaced, educated, modified, so early on they have a true consciousness, a true desire to understand themselves as a mutus and what the creative force is, access it, and then follow all the other permutations, market them, salesmanship, business industry skill sets, all focused on their original chassis, how God makes them all unique and individualistic. But the architecture of school, you become part of a machination, of a process, and you become processed or homogenized. Your consciousness is not open. I don't blame the school system today, but I think many of the music school systems need to be completely revamped and revolutionized.
We talk about that so often.
Christopher, listening to you, this flood of we're such big fans of music, the creative process, the return, hopefully, of it into just what you're saying, back into the educational system. But listening to you talk, I was getting this flood of emotion because I was thinking about, going back, not to get biblical, but going back to the word and the creation, the vibration, and how music just was. It was a creative process. And I was thinking to myself, and I'm mapping it to what you just said, that you're reconnecting the creative process within these students, because music became, from its aboriginal state, into a business, which then was separated, almost broken down into fractals. And it appears to me that you're reconnecting that as well as the creative process, which is amazing.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Mark. There certainly is a corresponding formula to what seems to be, I call them themes, which is nothing but aesthetic qualities that can be traced from childhood all through your growing years. I spoke to Jackie Chan once, and a great example, and I said, Jackie, when I meet superstars who seem to tap into success in a phenomenal height, my curious question is, well, give me 3 different themes in your childhood that shaped who you are today. When you ask superstars, they can answer you very quickly. Jackie said, I was born into a Chinese acrobatic family. I developed my muscles early. Number 2, The General. I saw Buster Keaton in the silent film The General, and I was completely taken by comedy. 1973, Bruce Lee. I was totally enraptured with Enter the Dragon. What do we have today? Comedy, martial arts, film star. He combined the themes into an original person. All 3 themes he was in love with. So he basically invested in things that he was joyous about. And when you're joyful, you communicate readily. People can sense that right away when you are dialed into who you are as a person. So I truly believe that my goal then is to come up with a course. How do we get to that chassis? Marie Curie discovered plutonium, but she focused on the prima materia, as she called it. St. John of the Cross, his theological, spiritual formula, if we use modern language, would be to get to the chassis of a car, not paint on the paint, but get rid of the paint and get to the structure. So I use a technique called sentence stem technique initially in the very nascent part of the course, and it deals with a series of sentence stems that tap into the consciousness to shape the artistic nature of the student. So if we weren't using musical terms, and I were to ask you, Mark, a sentence stem would be, if I added 5% more awareness to loving my mother, I would. So that's a classic sentence stem. It starts out with a hypothetical, it ends with a proactive, and then you're forced to answer. Now, the way the mind works is you don't take your time to answer. You answer quickly. You don't banter. This will become insouciant. This is critical because if we choose to take our time to answer the question, we let all those demons that relax us to answer relatively irresponsible to our psyche. And in the beginning, I find
some program stuff comes in, right?
Correct.
We let the programs come
Assumptions based on programming.
What we got off of TV or what we got off of family ties or what we think family's supposed to be. You're asking a specific question, and you want it to come right now from your psyche.
Yeah, and in the beginning it's frustrating because it's sort of like sentence stem boot camp for these kids. They're not familiar with the technique, and in your first notion is to answer illiterate. But the more you do it, the more literate your answers become and deeply sophisticated. So musically, being responsible as a musician to me means, if I were to add 5% more awareness to marketing myself as a performer, I would.
Wow.
So Monday through Sunday, in the morning and in the evening. What's very fascinating about this is, as you know, our bodies are different every day. Chemically, the food we eat, the rest we have, the relationships we meet. Very important to do one sentence stem, or many, but for a period of 7 days. And then you look backwards, and you take the top 3 answers, and those that have consistently come up, and that's the answer. And the most wonderful thing about this sentence stem technique, and we do this for 2 weeks, is after 2 weeks, they suddenly look in the mirror and go, maybe I shouldn't be in music. Now, these are what our teachers should do. Our teachers today are, because of the nature of music in the schools today, which is a terrible condition, is to make sure the classes are filled, guarantee their tenure, and have them in and out. But there seems to be a lack of focusing on how wonderful and endearing this one human being is, and also just, again, the nature of the programming. I mean, they are just inundated with architecture. They feel comfortable because, well, 4 years, hopefully, we're in and out of this so-called prison. But there's no chance early on to tap into their identity. Now, I could.
Where their greatness could be, too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I cannot. I was just talking to my dear friend Stephen Paris, who's with us today in the audience, director, writer, about Orson Welles. How do you account for a man at 26 directing Citizen Kane and being carte blanche to do it by RKO? How do you account for Leonard Bernstein at 14 years old, studying piano for the first time, and 10 years later he's conducting the New York Philharmonic? Tiepolo painted the 12 Apostles in 10 days. It takes 2 decades for Charles Darwin to write The Origin of Species. It takes Beethoven years to write a concerto. It takes Mozart, mythologically speaking, 2 hours or a couple of hours to write the overture to Don Giovanni before the premiere that night. Whether these myths are true or not, there's certainly enough reality there that art and its makeup is quite varied and different. But if you ask each one of these people, they can go back to childhood and say, you know, this became this. For me, my themes, jazz, acoustic guitar, Catholicism shaped and greatly influenced me. Food, we talked about cooking. I can't tell you how many times I used food consciously to network with people. Just if I can get them in the stomach, I can get them in the soul, you know. But the thing is, I'll give you a more pointed answer to where we're going with this sentence.
You have a more poignant answer?
I have a more poignant answer. And it's a young girl.
You might have to save it until when we come back.
Oh, that's okay.
Because I want to hear it, and I could sit here and listen to you all day, because your points, I mean, it's one point after another, and I don't really want a poignant answer because it all is relevant. This is what makes you you. And I remember you sitting at my house one day, and I don't remember if it was a party or something, but you asked me if you could, I don't think you even asked me, I think you just sat at the piano, and you got everybody's attention, and you say, picture this. And you painted this scene, like all of a sudden, there in my house was this scene of a road, or a dirt road with trees, and the leaves are falling, and then you started playing.
Oh, I remember.
You remember?
I remember, it was an improvisation, yeah.
And we were all just like, what, whoa, what just happened? And we wanted to know the rest of the story, like we do now. And we'll get a little bit more when we come back, actually. But that's one of the things that makes you you, and we love that about you. You want to learn more about Christopher Caliendo, you want to hear his music, you'll get to hear it a little bit later with our musical guest, John Barcellona, and the two of them are going to play some original Christopher Caliendo. But you can learn more about him at ChristopherCaliendo.com. Did you like how I said that? Caliendo? ChristopherCaliendo.com. We'll be right back after this on Life Changes. We are back, and if you haven't noticed, we are talking with Christopher Caliendo, composer, musician, teacher, publisher, symphonic writer. You actually mentioned St. John of the Cross earlier as an example for something, and that's a great example for a lot of things, because that's one of the pieces that you wrote an oratorio for the
John Paul II.
Life-changing moment.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure.
Oh, tremendously.
I mean, who gets to do that?
That's a whole show, but yeah, that was, and I'll never forget it. I was actually traveling in Italy, and it was in Milano. Actually, I was very infatuated with the young lady, and I wanted to meet the parents. It didn't go well, so I went south and followed the invitation of Giorgio Gallo, a manager of musical events in Rome. And within a half an hour, I was in the Vatican meeting the John Vigilio Levi, a Jewish man turned Catholic, and the right-hand man of John Paul II, who commissions the sculpture, painting, and music for the Pope. And no American in 53 years had been commissioned for the Incontri di Musica Sacra Contemporanea Festivale. And,
because they can't say it.
Because they can't say it, exactly. The Encounters of Sacred Contemporary Music. Sometimes I think I'm on an Italian show here. Anyway, 5 months later, I get the call, and they invited me to be the first American. And I chose St. Teresa of Avila of the Carmelite 16th century. And that was the first one. And then her contemporary is San Juan de Yepes, and his spiritual poetry just transformed my life. It was just, actually, probably that was the essential seeds beginning to develop for Composing Success, my motivational seminar.
Composing Success. What a great name for a motivational seminar.
Thank you.
And I actually think Composing the Symphony of Your Life is a great name for a show.
I like that too.
Now you had a story. Believe it or not, Christopher Caliendo had a story that if you could share that story quick enough, we'll get to what the course is more about. But
okay,
what was the story?
We were talking about sentence stems,
okay.
and this is the result of a young lady in junior high school, and I'll never forget her. I was invited to provide Composing Success, a sort of 90-minute pitch, and this young Japanese lady was sandwiched between two men. And you can see everything when you're teaching a course. I mean, you can see it's junior high school, so they're kind of making fun of her, and I can tell she didn't have the courage to ask to participate in the Q&A afterwards. But sure enough, after it was done, she walked up to me and said, "Christopher, I'm really fascinated by these themes you're talking about, and I want you to know that I love piano. I love late 19th century romantic piano music, and I love the human mind. I love psychology." So I said, "Have you ever thought of putting them all together?" Because that's the nature of the course. The sentence stems are access towards autonomy. That's the goal of the initial weeks of the course, is to make you autonomous. In other words, free your mind to hone in on those original traits that make you unique. Once we're there with those traits, then we combine them, like Jackie Chan did, as I told you. So here are her traits. Let's combine them. So instead of being the traditional pianist, and there are many of them, they get up, they perform a whole sonata, several sonatas, they take a bow, they don't communicate to the audience, they're off the stage. Suddenly I said, well, you love research, you love studying, you love the human mind, why don't you study the composers? And let's say Beethoven.
Oh, like the mind of the composer, or the...
Study his whole life, what he was going through at that time while he was composing this piece of music. Study all the extant letters
in a way that
stories.
only she can, because she's got the passion.
Exactly, and she's got this love of psychology. And then instead of playing the whole work, feature sections or a movement, and then tell the audience. And all of a sudden now you have a multimedia recital. It's a paradigm shift here. People are very aware of it. Can it be taught? Can it be acquired? Can it be learned? And I think it can.
And
with
the
this
answer
course.
is yes, with a course called Composing Success. So tell us a little bit about the course, and a little later we're going to hear what it did for you.
Yeah,
your music.
Again, initially we focus on sentence stem technique to unearth those traits that are unique and passionate. And then we have a session called Themata, where these themes, these resultant answers to these sentence stems are shared in the classroom, just to create a class forum. People are excited at this point. And then we combine these themes, and they start to think about who they are as a performer. And it really changes them, because then they all of a sudden are making decisions like, what kind of music do I want to play? If I'm a composer, should I be a performer? Then they start to see the advantage of the composer being the performer. All these things begin surfacing. And then we launch into all these very practical industry sort of skill sets, starting with, when you're at college, the choice of the daytime job. Many kids unconsciously say, "Oh, it's cool, I'll work at Starbucks, I'll meet a lot of people." I'm generalizing here, but the more serious student, you can't learn everything in your college years, especially as a composer. Composers today have to be publishers. They have to be performers. They really have a lot of skill sets, the performer as well. The paradigm shifts with social media have forced us to take advantage of every man's created equal. These are democratic ideals, fantastic. Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and all these different means to communicate an accessible audience. So finding a daytime job, think more seriously about using it as an opportunity to add to your artistic vision. Now that you have an idea where the artistic vision is and maybe where you're going with it, what other skill sets can I acquire at a daytime job in conjunction with my schooling education to really hone in and compel us and encourage and empower us?
Don't just make money. Learn something while you're doing it.
You got it, absolutely.
To supplement what you're really wanting to learn.
Yeah, and many kids do, and I'm proud of them. But essentially, many don't.
A lot of people don't think this way. This is why this is great to have this conversation.
Yeah, I think.
I wanted to add that, I may be pointing out the obvious, but for those that aren't drawing the connection, for me, I was picturing, envisioning the idea of these themes and applying a note to each of these themes. And I think Fillipo and I have talked many times about how we have various interests. And it's very difficult because people want to put you in a box. So you're talking about this girl and being interested in psychology and these other themes. And if each one of these themes is applied or to a note, it's like playing only one note all the time. Whereas what you're doing is now combining all of those notes, going again into the composing vernacular that you're using in allowing them to express themselves in this full body symphony.
Well, you tapped into when you said in the box. I think American life is so kinetic, we are almost forced into a box, and this whole idea of emulation is very dangerous. Now, it's not dangerous to emulate when you're very young. I want to write like Beethoven. I want to write like Stravinsky. Now, this compels the passions, but you have to cut the umbilical cord early on because there is a Yo-Yo Ma, and he's original. Look what he's done. Study him. Study Sting. I mean, study the great pop music of your generation, and I guarantee you all of those recordings are original. They don't follow the mold generally. Look at the Beatles. I mean, my goodness. I think more and more because of the American lifestyle and the pressures on us, we're thinking less and less originally. We're more form of a function. And we see it in the franchise mentality in Hollywood. Spider-Man 10, Superman meets Batman. I mean, how much of this? And along comes a beautiful film that's quiet and dignified and European, perhaps, and makes you think. We become philosophical 30 seconds before we die. What are we going to remember? Are we going to remember going to McDonald's or going to Il Pistaio? We're going to remember those cherished memories. So that's a great notion. And the daytime job after that, you teach children the importance of networking in college. If you can't afford a CRM, Excel spreadsheet's free. Start to accrue all these different affiliations you have. They're not warm, they're hot leads, and you never know where they're going to go on after college. So you teach them Excel spreadsheets that can easily be exported into your future CRM.
That's awesome.
Very important. And then ultimately, as you see the classroom begin to get confident with themselves, they realize that all these early self-esteem exercises translate into how they're going to market themselves, how they're going to build their website, how they're going to use social media, and then we look at the income streams. I ask composers. I was at a very auspicious school, very auspicious music school, conservatory. I sat in front of composers and said, "Tell me how to copyright your work." Silence. Do you know where the 11 income streams are for a composer today? Silence. What are we teaching these kids? Let me get this right. You're going to spend your childhood, years of teenagerhood, incredible amounts of money, and time and effort and dedication, and you don't know the marketplace? You don't know where the income streams are? You don't know how to protect? You don't understand that what you have is intellectual copyright and it's extremely valuable? So I'm not saying this with every school, but you'd be so surprised how many schools.
Yeah.
These are basics, folks. But
this morning, Mark, you sent me something, and then somebody else sent me something. It was a day of this. I got like 3 things of what we didn't learn in school. And it's not about music. It has nothing to do with music. It has to do with life, if we had learned this in school. So what you're saying, actually, it works to me on so many levels for me. And it also, like you said, there were the children or the students who, after taking your course, they realize that maybe I don't want to do music. The same applies the other way around. So now they can take the music that they learned and apply it to their teaching or to their doctor or something or whatever else. They could apply it there because there's something valuable here that they learned that they could bring into that career.
Yeah. It's
That'll
really,
make them
it's
unique
really
there.
applicable, right, to most anything. Really. I just opened up my music in a French store off in Paris. So the man calls me as we begin to facilitate his order. The guy calls me from France. And he says, "Mr. Caliendo, your music is like sunshine to us in France. It's like Van Gogh. It's got colors." And I'm like, I'm in Brea, California. I don't get this every day at all. But that's the color shift we're talking about. That's when you're in tune with yourself and others are in tune with you. That's we're not really talking. Of course, we have to talk practically, fixed and variable costs. But boy, this is there's some
exciting.
connection there, I think, between your. If I was perhaps writing other types of music, I don't know. But I really am in love with world music. I'm in love with my childhood, and I bring my childhood with me wherever I go. And I've had many distractions along the way and many failures. But now that I'm looking back, and now that I'm consciously driven on this purpose, and it's a purpose of teaching now and sharing with the world, this world music that I do, it's been much more joyful and restorative for me.
Well, we're about to experience some of that joyful and restorative music. When we come back, we are going to hear you and your colleague of many years. And a man
God bless
who's
him.
well known in his own right, John Barcellona, when we come back right after this. Are talking in the studio. We're having a great time. We've been talking to Christopher Caliendo, ChristopherCaliendo.com. Actually, we're not done with him. This is a first for Life Changes. Our life is changing as we speak, as our guest transitions from guest to join our musical guest, who is John Barcellona. And Christopher Caliendo is going to be playing on the guitar. John is going to be playing on the flute. And together, they'll be playing Christopher Caliendo's music. Now, John Barcellona is well known in his own right. He, as Mark said earlier, he's known as the flute doctor, was it?
That's
okay,
it.
I just wanted to make sure I got that right. But he is a Grammy-nominated artist in his own right, and he's a freelance musician, but he's the professor of flute and the director of woodwind studies at California State University, Long Beach, which is a really big job. And you've been there many years. You also teach doctoral students at Claremont, right? Graduate University.
That's
so
right.
You're a busy guy. Thank you so much for bling here.
Yeah, it's great to bling here.
Well, you actually do bling. He's all blinged out. You've got this shirt that blings, and then you're known for your hats too, I guess, right? You've got caps of many colors.
Many colors.
Just real quickly, I have to ask you, how did you get into playing the flute? Of all the instruments, and why the flute?
Well, I was born in Los Angeles, and there used to be live television back in the late 40s and the early 50s, and there was a show called the Firestone Theater that it had live opera singers and a live orchestra. And at the end of the show, the orchestra would play instrumentally as they rolled the credits. And I could never wait until the camera panned on the flutes.
Really?
And then when I was in 4th grade in New York, the school band came to demonstrate to recruit people. The flute player, he stood up, and the light from the stage shone up and down the flute, and that was it.
Wow.
I was sold.
I haven't heard that story.
Wow. Well, I was just about to turn to you, Christopher, and say, did you see that passion?
Yeah.
His hands went up, his eyes lit up, and how he described
Initial
it.
spark memory, translated over many years.
That's a fine example of the course that we were just talking about, the composing.
You mean I passed?
Composing success. A lot of students don't know those answers, right? The music students, they don't know that answer that John just so brilliantly gave to us.
Yeah.
So helping them find if they had that, and if they didn't have that, maybe they shouldn't be here. Mm-hmm. But maybe they have that for something else. So this is brilliant. Thank you, John. That was as if it was right on cue. And let me ask you, just between you and me, what do you think of Christopher's music?
I knew he was going to say that.
Oh, it's wonderful. I'm here playing it. No, it's absolutely
You've
wonderful.
been playing it for years. You played at his wedding.
Did, yes. We do many things together musically, and otherwise we're great friends, and it's the music that brought us together as friends.
Christopher, what are we going to hear first?
We're going to hear a piece called Jal, which in the Romani Gypsy tradition means journey. Interestingly enough.
Now, you all can't see the music, but if you saw it, there are dots everywhere. So if I know Christopher,
It's gypsy music.
This is going to go fast. So it's called Jal, and it means what?
Journey.
It means journey. Oh, how perfect.
Yeah. If you study your gypsies
Life changes.
from England, they were the first ones to color wagons with bright colors. They were generally happy, and journeying was a very happy aspect. Gypsies borrow the land, And so the land's very important to them and vital to them, but they journey, and this captures the journeying spirit. In it, you're going to hear American jazz, gypsy, jazz, and a little swing from John. And John's playing on a very special flute today.
John?
Maybe he'd like to.
Yes, this my flute has a glissando head joint. Glissando like a slide on a trombone.
Right.
So I have the ability to slide from note to note.
I heard that during rehearsal. I'm like, how is he doing that?
Yeah.
So that's unique to. Did you develop that?
No, a friend of mine in New
I've
York,
never seen
Robert
that.
Dick, did, and there's not many in existence. This is only number 34.
Wow. Well, this is a first for me. There it is. We're going to hear what it sounds like, and we get to hear Jal.
Jal.
Oh, Jal.
Jal,
With
almost
Christopher
French.
Caliendo and at the guitar, and John Barcellona at the flute. Mr. Caliendo, we love your music. It's like sunshine to us.
Very good. To us too.
It's like a Van Gogh!
It's like a mango.
Bright colors!
But it is. I haven't mentioned your CDs. And they're available at ChristopherCaliendo.com,
Yeah,
right?
we're an all-digital publisher and MP3, so everything is downloaded from the site. And yeah, it makes it available to the public at much less the price and very efficient.
And give us a couple of the names of the CDs.
The Caliendo Trio Volume 1 would be nice because it's with what you're hearing now with cello.
Okay.
And it really is, if we're really focusing on the world music, that would be Gypsy Americana would be another one, which is actually done with a Caliendo Trio as well with cello. Ardiente, Torbellino, or Tango, American Tangos for flute and guitar.
Right.
Yeah, and there's a lot of soundtracks I've done that's available on the site that I own the rights to. Do you tune to A? I was just curious.
Are we tuned?
We're tuned, I think we are. We're in tune. We're in tune with ourselves, each other, and the music.
We're going to hear Christopher Caliendo playing Caliente in Barcelona, the flute doctor. Oh, you guys, here they come. I think you wrote that just to see John do that.
I don't think you've ever played it that fast, man.
Pretty fast.
Maya, for 80 years old, you kick.
80 years old? Are you serious?
No.
Wow, I must look sad.
Well, we have time to practice.
Okay, no, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Wow, this has been very, very special. If we had fun like this in the studio every day, I could do this every day.
Every day.
I mean, no, we always have fun, but this has been
Oh, you make
extremely
it fun,
special.
both of you gentlemen.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you.
And thank you,
both.
Brent Hahn, for engineering.
Yes,
this.
thank
And
you,
those
Brent
two lovely
Hahn,
ladies back
indeed.
there, Dar
And yes, of course, and Steve.
Steve Paris is here
Paris,
filming the whole
yes.
thing for us. God bless him.
So
Director, writer.
Thanks for being here with us.
entrepreneur.
And Christopher Caliendo,
Thank you.
John Barcelona, on behalf of Dorothy Donahue and Mark Lejeune and myself, our engineer Doug Newsom. I'm exhausted, actually. I'm breathing hard.
You need to run a few more marathons.
Yeah,
I'm going to go write some music if that's okay with you.
that'd be great. Saying ciao, everyone.
Ciao, Filippo.
You have been listening to the Life Changes Show on the BBS Radio Network.